Is anyone having trouble with that? Leslie, is it giving an error message? If anyone's having trouble, you can, in the chat window, write your challenge. Oops. Oh, looks like folks have already started voting. So if you're also having trouble logging in, you can vote in the chat window as well. So as I mentioned, we've limited funding. How we want to prioritize what are the places where we invest first, or invest the kind of majority of the resources. So a lot of competing interests here. So you'll see the first three are all addressing biking and walking. Looks like those are, it looks like kind of a little horse race going on here. But we see active transportation being a priority in all three respects, both crossings as well as segments both for biking and walking. And then microtransit as well, rising to the top. And then one that we haven't talked about yet is shared mobility. So seen a lot of these in the Boulder area and Longmont area. And that's bike share or scooters, and those can be electric or not electric. They can be docked or free floating. So lots of different providers that offer that service and that are popping up in cities around the country. And then bike parking as well. That's a great one. So if you do have a longer trip and are biking, that there's a place. Secure bike parking generally means it's accessible only by kind of lock and key. So sometimes there's a small payment associated with that, and it generally is covered. So in inclement weather, your bike stays safe. Great. Well, it looks like we've got most of the votes in. So I'd love to open it up. I think folks can take themselves off mute, and if folks want to chime in as to what they voted and why they voted that way, or even on the counterpoint, why did you not vote for a certain type of recommendation?
Hi, my name's Kat. I voted for the pedestrian bicycle crossings because the crossing, when you reach, so 119, you can either veer to the right or you can keep going straight. I don't know what that turns into. Front, yeah. But anyways, it's really difficult to get through that crossing, to go straight instead of take that exit without getting hit.
Yeah, that's a great example for sure. And if that crossing doesn't feel safe, that could impact your decision as to how you get to the station or whether you take transit at all.
I think that caller was referring to the airport road intersection, Boulder bound, is my guess.
I believe so. Yeah, I think that sounds right. The one where you would either keep going on 119 or you would keep going on Flatirons Parkway, I think it is, that it turns into.
Yeah, I don't think she's at airport. She's at she's at Diagonal, and you're right, you're coming south into Boulder.
Correct, from Longmont.
Oh, J Road?
You pass a little past J Road, right? You pass J Road, and then there's that split. Diagonal versus, heading over to 28th.
Yeah, Foothills Parkway.
Foothills, thank you. There it is. There's been quite a bit of work there, right? Isn't there some walking underneath the highway and by the, well.
Yeah, there is, but if I don't keep going straight, it adds an extra 30 minutes to my commute.
Right, there is no straight, got it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how about, what does microtransit look like? That one was sort of caught my eye, and I didn't even know how might be voting there.
Yeah, that's a great question. So an example of how it would work, say you are traveling from the Gun Barrel BRT station to Celestial Seasonings for a tour, you would request a trip. Within 15 minutes, a bus would arrive. It's generally the size of kind of a mid-sized van, kind of 15-passenger van, and it might drop some employees off at their employment centers first, but then it would ultimately get to your requested destination. And then when you want your trip back, you'll request that trip, and it will take you back to the BRT station. So there's a lot of employment areas and dense residential areas around the Gun Barrel station, but they're a little bit too far for folks to walk, and there's not a feeder bus route. So microtransit would basically serve the purpose for as you would imagine a bus that would get you there, but it runs in a very optimized way, because it's only if someone requests a trip does that bus even go to a stop at all. So it can run pretty quickly and efficiently in that Gun Barrel area.
Thank you.
Would that be?
Oh, go ahead.
Would that feature be accessible through the same app that you could like look at bus times and things like that, or would it be separate?
That's a great question. So this is kind of high level beginning stages now. So that level of detail hasn't yet been discussed, but RTD is a part of these conversations, and the goal would definitely be to integrate this service as much as possible with the BRT. So that means when you maybe buy your BRT ticket, you can also purchase a microtransit ticket, or when you go to Trip Plan and you see all of the times, you can see the time of the microtransit service, or kind of how long your wait time is, as well as the BRT service.
Hi, my name is Sylvia. My question was more about people with mobility impairments. I've noticed, I walk the area east of 47th Street in Boulder, and it's very famous in the winter, especially for being covered, all the lanes, the crossings, everything covered in snow and ice. So to me, I guess that these questions are for people who have the mobility to walk or ride bicycles, but how about the people who don't have that are impaired?
Yeah, that's a great question, and accessibility for users of all ages and abilities is one of the most important considerations here. So we'll be going to the different station areas, and we call it a walking audit. So walking around the different stations and doing so in the perspective of those with mobility challenges. So not just what are the important things to consider at the crossings, but also maintenance in poor weather, and making sure that curb ramps are ADA accessible, that all of the elements are also ADA accessible, so that users in wheelchairs or users of all abilities are able to safely and comfortably access the station.
And in looking at that audit, do you follow that earlier half-mile and 1 mile radius thinking? Or do you go
Yeah,
that
so
far?
that's kind of the focus area of where the recommendations will be. If there's a destination that there are a lot of people walking from that's outside of that area, we're considering that as well. But just to primarily focus on that space where we're seeing most of the most pedestrian activity, that's focused in half mile.
I voted there for the shared mobility bike share system, and I think that's really great for both first and last mile, because for instance, if you have your bike for the first mile, then what do you do for the last mile, right? And I just moved out from DC, where they have a very extensive bike share program, and I mean, it makes it very pointless to have a car out there, because you're able to get everywhere with Metro bus and bike share. Like, it really extends coverage, and I voted for it because I would like to see, I guess, more extensive bike share from B-Cycle. I don't know how feasible that is. Like, in its current state, it really only covers, places that I would probably just end up walking anyway. And so it's kind of, you brought up critical mass before, and I think for bike share to be really effective, it needs to be like reaching pretty much everywhere. And again, I don't know how feasible that is based on how it's getting funded and all of that, but you know, in DC, it was, you know, pretty much every block you could park a bike or pick up a bike in the main city center and even out into the suburbs. And so anyway, I guess I don't know. I voted for it with the kind of like grand idea that it would be perfect. In its current state, I don't think it's something to really optimize for, but it would be nice for being able to handle both first and last mile along with the bus, I think.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Daniel. Definitely a nice flexible option, and something that's working really well in other cities around the country that can be considered here as well, and see what the feasibility of it is. Tom, it looks like you're raising your hand.
Yeah, my name is Tom, and I'm glad to see that bicycling ranked high on people's lists. I either commute or ride recreationally 5 or 6 days a week. I interact with 119, and I'd have to tell you that I don't know what percentage, but you know, at least 10% of the time, I feel like I'm taking my life in my hands, either trying to cross or even just riding along. And there's places where there's a bike path, but it's discontinuous. And it sure would be nice if, you know, on US 36, at least for a good portion of it, getting to Denver, there's now a bike path. And it would be nice, I mean, I'll shoot for the moon if there were a bike path on both sides that was separated from the road. Because sometimes people driving alongside of you like to make a point that you shouldn't be on their road. And they do it in different ways, but it feels dangerous sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is a very kind of illustrative example of what that bike path will look like. So it's definitely separated from vehicles. So we want to talk about how are you going to get to that bike path, providing those east-west connections.
Yeah. How?
Yeah, that's what I'd love to hear from you all. What we're working hard to discuss.
This is Eve Lempriere. One comment I have on that is I'm also a cyclist who crosses 119 more than I care to admit. One of the things I find is I periodically get stuck at a crossing because there's no car to trigger the light.
Mm-hmm.
So I do think, and that's one of the reasons I voted that for number one, is I feel like there are times when I have to ride through a red light or just sit there and wait till a car triggers the turn light. One of the places is 63rd when you're trying to cross the westbound lane into Boulder. There is no button if you're heading north. So you can easily get stuck there. And I've also had Niwot Road going east where the light just doesn't seem to want to change for me. So I think improving the changes, how the lights impact for bikes, and making sure there's a button accessible for a bike would make a huge difference for my safety.
Yeah, thanks, Eve.
I would agree with Eve. I experience that often as well. So that's a great thought, Eve. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, that's great feedback. And there's lots of technology for, it's called bicycle detection, and that either works by magnet or camera. So that's a great piece of feedback that can be a part of these recommendations.
Yeah, hi, this is Milton. I'd like to echo what the two speakers just talked about. Although I don't commute in that area very much, I also find myself trying to cross Highway 119 and getting a light, but then getting stuck in the next light because it's not long enough for a cyclist to get across the entire highway.
Yeah, so signal timing, that's timed for the speed of bikes rather than the speed of cars.
Absolutely.
And that's something that's a complicated puzzle to make sure that the whole system works. So something that we can look into, but is definitely to make sure that the BRT works effectively, those signals are coordinated with them, but something we can look into.
Hey, my name is Alana Davis-Delaria. I just also wanted to add, one of the things that I think makes answering this poll a little bit difficult is that the first and last mile are going to be very different depending on whether you're going from Longmont to Boulder. So I can imagine getting to Boulder, I have lots of bus options in that last mile, but I don't have very many bus options in Longmont in the first mile. So I think that actually, for me, it's hard to sort of combine those first and final miles, because I think that there's a different sort of just infrastructure for that in Boulder versus in Longmont right now. And I know we've been really working hard in Longmont to address that, but the reality is, right, it's just different right now in the two cities.
Definitely. And then those 3 trunk stations at Gunbarrel, Niwot, and 52 are also very different. So we can't just come up with one set of solutions and apply them universally at every proposed station. So we're looking specifically at different stations, and recommendations will be different at different stations. That's a great point. And I think with that, what's working well at your last mile, how can we kind of bring those recommendations into other station areas too? So thanks, Elena. It's a good acknowledgement.
I have another comment. This is Eve on the bicycle pathways. There are places, and I'm trying to think of an example right now, where bike lanes go through the intersection. So you know, if you're going straight, here's where you cross the right turn lane. Somebody earlier referenced the southbound airport intersection at 119, and that is so dangerous because there you have to cross the right turn lane, and traffic doesn't know if you're going straight when you're going to merge over to the left to go straight. And I know I wrote Boulder County, I think it was, about that intersection. But I think that one in particular is being worked on now, and making it so it's clear if you're a cyclist going straight until they build an underpass. Hopefully there's an underpass in the future. It's a safety concern.
Great. This is a good segue. Wanted to chat more specifically in a facilitated discussion about some specific areas where folks have feedback. So I think naturally we all have started to go there when we think about our commutes. So I've brought up the map that we have available on the website, which I can share the link to. And so we don't need to drop pins and lines now, but thought that scrolling around, and we can see people who've left comments already and see some of the challenges as it relates to specific locations. So just to give folks an overview of this map, it shows those 2 BRT alignments, and then gives you an opportunity to address specific locations where you don't feel comfortable. So you can see on the right the different options you have. You can identify where you don't feel safe crossing, where you would like to park your bike, where you'd like to use bus rapid transit, or where you want wayfinding. And those are just specific points. And if there's a certain line, kind of a segment you want to address, you can say where you don't feel safe biking and where you don't feel safe walking. And then what we'll do is take this information, so we can zoom in on an example here. And so we've heard from folks that along this segment, they don't feel safe biking. It's a busy highway with no sidewalks. And look and see, okay, what is the appropriate bike facility based off the volume that's on State Highway 52 and the speed of vehicles, and make recommendations accordingly. So seeing a lot in the comment chat about people not feeling comfortable and not feeling safe. And so by identifying those specific locations, we can work with Audrey and the team at Longmont and City of Boulder and Boulder County to make sure we identify recommendations that will counter that. So we can look at it.
Share the link to this in the chat so we can click into it.
Yeah, for sure. Great, thanks for doing that. So you can see specific locations. So say this person would like to park their bike here, and if I agree with that, you can upvote it, and we'll see the number of counts of folks who have similar comments. The more people that we're seeing feel the same way, then that's really a high priority for us. And then the green line, this is call it a base map, or here's where there are existing facilities as well. So the green is where there's existing multi-use paths, orange is where there's existing bike lanes. So you can see, oh, there's a gap in the path here. It's just a crossing, but it's a good example of, oh, the path ends here. How can we make sure that it connects further? So we'd love to hear from folks. I know we've already begun to talk about specific locations, but we can zoom in on them and look and see those specific intersection challenges, or maybe it's a corridor, and see what's out there today and what we want to recommend.
Have you thought?
This is Conrad Geiger. I'd like to make one more recommendation on the comment earlier about crossings and not being triggered because no other automobile traffic is there. I want to point out that many bikes out there today are carbon fiber, and they don't have enough metal mass to actually do to trigger an in the road kind of sensor.
Yeah.
So that's one problem I've had before.
Yeah, I think there's a different, so that wouldn't trigger the magnetic one, but there are the cameras that are more motion detected that it does work on. So there's a few different technologies, and I've heard that challenge before. And so kind of working within the technologies, understanding the rider type is really important. So thanks for pointing that out.
Have you thought about, this is Steve Ransweiler, I work for City of Longmont, designing and building trails. Have you thought about how you're going to incorporate Lobo into the diagonal bikeway? And if there's going to be connections between the two, or are you just treating Lobo as a completely recreational trail and trying to get the commuters between the lanes?
Oh, definitely connecting. I think leveraging where there's existing bike facilities will be key. And what are those points where we can make sure that there's a seamless connection there. So not seeing that as just a recreational trail, but also an opportunity for transportation, and one that will be tied into the State Highway 119 bikeway as well. So that's a great point, Steve.
What's a good way to look at this map and see that bike trail? Because I don't see it clearly pointed out here.
You have to zoom in to have those existing bike facilities pop up, and that's just to keep the map not too crowded. So there's a link in the chat window, and as you zoom, you'll see those layers appear.
So this is Matt Kraft. I just had a kind of a question about timing, I guess, because it looks like you're basically reclaiming the shoulder space to add in the HOV lanes. And like, I'm comfortable with riding down the highway with the wide shoulders, but I guess I'm just curious how the timing of that bikeway lines up between how the lane lines change.
So the bus rapid transit's going to be running on the inside lane. You can see the bus here.
Yeah, I'm just assuming, like, the roadway today is basically 3 lanes wide, but the rightmost is just a wide shoulder. And I'm assuming you're basically moving the lines over as the proposal, or are they actually adding roadway?
I don't believe the roadway is moving, but Audrey, if you'd like to chime in.
I just mean, like, are we going to build the bikeway before we move the road around, or that's my question, is just the timing of that.
Oh, the phasing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, ideally, I'd like the bikeway to be available before the roadway basically becomes less friendly to bikes, I guess.
Well, our desire and goal would make it friendly to bikes throughout, before, during, and after any future construction project. You know, we aren't in that level of detail yet with the corridor design, but we know that this is a heavily traveled corridor by bicycle, and only want to make it even better. So thanks for your comments around making sure cycling facilities are safe during construction as well as after.
Yeah, I realize it's probably nitpicky at this stage, but that's just probably one of my main concerns, is not like losing my current commute path basically while that is going on.
Oh, that's a great point, Matt. Not nitpicky at all, and definitely important considerations that during all phases that there's safe places to bike.
This is Phil Wald from City of Longmont. We did work with the Colorado Department of Transportation and RTD on the bus rapid transit study, and it was the idea that if the shoulders where people are bicycling now are impacted at all, that bikeway in the middle be built first. And that we get adequate bicycle facilities before any bus rapid transit's built.
Okay, thanks, Phil.
So I guess it's hard looking at this map to understand how this new proposed bikeway that's going to be paved in the center is going to be connecting to existing bike lanes. Is there any way to recognize how they will connect?
Yeah, Scott, thanks for that question. That's part of these recommendations is looking at where the proposed station is and looking at the existing bikeways and identifying where there are gaps to make sure that one can travel comfortably and that there are no gaps in that low stress bicycle experience to get from the existing trails to the proposed BRT stations. So that's one of the primary goals of this process, and the outcome of this study is to identify facilities to fill in those gaps.
What I'm hearing from the group of people on this call is that most of these people are riding with traffic rather than on a separated bikeway, and wondering how you're going to try to get people to be comfortable on a bikeway, because it's a different experience, different speeds, different conflicts. As far as how you're going to try to design to encourage and try to get people to use these who have been riding in the shoulder for 20 years to and from their jobs.
Yeah.
So I don't want to interrupt, I guess, but for me personally, I think the Lobo Trail past like Ogallala Road or whatever up there runs along the highway, and that's really convenient. But further toward Boulder, it's really kind of indirect, and it's a nice recreational trail, but it's not very fast to get from Longmont to Boulder. So I think that bikeway down the highway in the middle of the lanes or wherever sounds great because it's direct.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, Matt, that's a great point. I think folks are riding in the shoulder not because they prefer to be mixed with traffic, but because it's a direct option. So to have a bikeway that is equally as direct is generally preferable. But if there are other, call them vehicular cyclists, other regular cyclists on the line that want to speak to their preference, or if there would be any concerns with a proposed bikeway, that would ideally be wide enough that some of those barriers to using a path would be conflicts with pedestrians or passing bicyclists, and the width of that bikeway will help account for that.
So I think you hit two others. The concern with the Lobo Trail right now is there's too much is not paved, and there are a lot of pedestrians and dogs and kids. So if you're really trying to commute, it's awkward.
Yeah, it'd be great to hear from other folks who maybe don't currently ride, but would like to, if there were more comfortable places. And what will it take to feel comfortable biking to transit or biking to a nice trail?
I am a person who rides with their children a lot. I mean, I ride with my children to work, but I ride out with my children. I have 3 kids under 12. And riding on J Road or any other place where you're in the bike lane next to the cars is always a terrifying experience for me. I generally ride, like my youngest kid who's 6, I ride next to him in the bike lane, and I have cars come up, drive really close to me, honk at me, like ride right next to me and honk, 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 even though I'm not in the street. And it seems like it's gotten worse. There's a lot of people that are out on their phones while they're driving, and I would just like to feel safe biking with my kids, be as far away, like preferably like completely separated from the cars. And J Road is kind of the epitome of that experience for me.
Yeah, that's great, Anna. And some of the tactics that we use to identify what is the appropriate bike facility type on a certain street like J Road is we look at the speed and we look at the volume, and we think about ages 8 to 80 is that kind of litmus test of what can we recommend so that folks of all ages feel comfortable. And so often on a higher speed road like J Road, it's putting in a vertical buffer or something to protect people between the bike lane and the travel lane, so that you'll feel safer riding with your kiddos.
I don't even have kids, and I hate that part of my biking too.
Yeah.
I'm curious if anybody on here is working in East Boulder and has questions or issues about how and where they'd get off, because I'm concerned that at the moment RTD's plan is not showing the 47th and diagonal stop, and I think it's necessary. I think the BJAD stop will help a little bit, but if you work out at Central or 55th, access to or from this bus is going to be really hard.
Mm-hmm.
I work out there. I know there's a bus, like I'm trying to figure this out. There's a bus that runs down Valmont from 30th Street, I think, or maybe from 28th that you would connect to. But in general, I agree that I think that stop on 47th would probably be a nice place to have a bus. Because there are quite a few folks that work out there on 55th.
And we're not showing the rest of the RTD network here as well. So that would be an interesting layer too to add to see those connections.
Yeah, I used to have to get off at 28th and Iris, but the 208, if I was trying to get east on Valmont, it left 2 minutes before the bus arrived. I think they changed it after frequent complaints, but then I started taking my bike, and it's a 2-mile ride, but it was easy because you could hit Wonderland Creek, but just some of the access through those areas is not simple.
It's a very complicated network back in there, yeah.
Going east-west to cross foothills at an actual intersection is tough. It's not so bad if you can be, say, on Goose Creek. Goose Creek's a pretty easy way to get past foothills. Walnut, if you're that far south, but, you know.
Yeah, thanks, Elaine. I think wayfinding is a great way to help the intuitiveness of that system and make those connections.
Well, I think it's more than wayfinding. I think it's protected intersections and just really making that more simple. Because even north-south at, say, Foothills and Pearl, it's a little stressful.
I wonder if you have plans to show us some improvements that you're going to do on the current design, considering, for example, that Boulder is growing north or east of 47th. There's that new neighborhood that is huge. And I can see that it's going to keep growing. And right now, the only stop that I can really pinpoint is the one on 47th that is pretty small. It's like worth just a small neighborhood.
Yeah, so are you asking about showing some of what would be proposed?
Yeah, especially if this, I guess the idea is to have it completed by 2040, so it's 20 years from now. And right now we have this new neighborhood that it's called Diagonal something, I don't remember, and it's huge. And how is that tiny bus stop on 47th going to really absorb all that traffic?
Diagonal crossing.
Yeah, that's the name.
Sorry if I'm not understanding your question. So the demand for transit at that stop is too high to be accommodated by the
I
bus
think
route?
it's going to be too high. It's a new neighborhood, so I think they're just it's not fully habited right now. And my question is more related to addressing the growth that Boulder, and I'm sure the rest, like Gambaro for sure, Niwot, are going to have in the next 20 years. Like what do you have planned for that growth?
Yeah, that was kind of what we showed in the baseline data is a lot of population and employment growth. And so these proposed stations will be kind of similar when you think about the US 36 stations, much bigger and have much more kind of accommodation and shelters for folks waiting for the bus than the existing Bolton J stops do. So those are planned, and I believe there's images for those stops that I could send you if you're interested. And so these growth projections are all a part of the considerations for the recommendations that went into the BRT planning and that we're considering as well for the first and final mile study.
Thank you.
So this is Conrad again, and this may have been discussed earlier, but I may have missed it. But on the bike pathway, as it crosses Airport and Niwot Road and 63rd, all those intersections, typically in the past, you just went with the traffic. When the light turned green, you went, otherwise you waited. Since you're going to be on a separate path, how is that going to work through those intersections where you've got traffic coming off Niwot Road or people turning left or right from both directions on the main highway?
Yeah, that's a great question. When there's a dedicated bike facility like a path, there's a few ways to think about crossings. There's under or over crossings. So that grade separation means that the traffic operations don't need to be impacted, or the vehicles don't need to slow down. So I know there's a few of those recommended along the bikeway. They're very expensive. So at lower volume intersections, there's other ways to make sure that the bicyclists are safe and we reduce the number of conflict points. So we can change the way that the signals are timed. So sometimes there's called a green ball currently, means that you can make permitted right turns and you yield to the bikes. Instead, we can put a red arrow for vehicles turning right and give the bikes and the pedestrians their own signal. So lots of different ways, without getting into the details of the jargon, to make sure that there's dedicated time in that intersection cycle for the bicyclists and pedestrians to cross where there's not a conflict with vehicles.
Yeah, so far, I mean, from what I've seen, everything else seems pretty safe, but this looks like it is something to be considered pretty highly. Otherwise, there's going to be some tragic consequences there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, safety is very important, and so that's definitely, there's part of the analysis is a big focus on intersection improvements.
Talking about safety and going back to the center middle bike lane, will there be multiple lanes for each direction? Specifically, one of the things that we see on other bike trails is you have very fast bikers on electric bikes, and you have slower bikes who are more manual. Everyone bikes at different speeds. So especially considering this would be along a highway, I imagine there could be some pretty serious fast bikers or electric bikers trying to swing on by, and you'd want to make sure there's plenty of space if they have to pass and such.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. I know the design of the bikeway has been done preliminarily, but there's a next phase of design that's in the near future. So I'm not sure the level of detail as far as the width of the bike facility or kind of center striping to make sure that there's space for passing or bicyclists of different speeds. So Phil or Audrey, if those details are already identified, you can chime in, but I know there's still in the designing phase for the bikeway.
Yeah, the idea is that the bikeway is going out as a separate project, separate from what this project is doing. And so there'll be the ability to comment on that project as well. So CDOT and Boulder County is going out to bid on that project very soon. So there'll be a whole opportunity just similar to this one about just about the bikeway.
Great. We probably have time for one more.
To the model that we have on US 36 through the US 36 bikeway, you know, it currently accommodates all ability levels of travelers. So one would hope that, you know, the 119 corridor project might have a similar approach.
Okay, thanks, Audrey. Probably time for one more comment, and then want to make sure we get to next steps.
There's a lot of people that don't like US 36 because it's so noisy. And I can imagine it would be even noisier if you go down the middle of 119.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's one of the trade-offs in order to provide, you know, a highway for bicyclists that is very direct. So, you know, if someone wants a quieter ride, they can use the Lobo Trail. But if you want a direct commuter bikeway, then this is what that is envisioned to be. And the noise factor is, I would think we have very little that we could do to accommodate that. But I'm sure Boulder County will keep that in mind as part of the final design process.
Thanks, Audrey.
Somebody mentioned Amsterdam or Netherlands. What do they do? How do they separate their bikes and cars?
Shrubbery, lots of shrubbery and trees.
Yeah, landscaping can definitely absorb some noise, and in designing the street network from an earlier stage for all modes makes it a little easier. So I want to get into next steps. So in addition to joining this meeting, thank you all for your evening hour. There's two other ways to give input. So I'll put in the chat window the website that you can use to access the other two mediums. So we looked at the interactive web map, and there's also an online survey that's in both English and Spanish, and the web map will be up in Spanish soon as well. So definitely visit this webpage to find out how to stay involved and to continue to give your input. And tell your friends and family there are 2 more virtual town halls, and the one on August 12th is in Spanish only. So would love to have folks join in for the other 2 for a similar conversation, but to hear from more community members. And keep an eye on the website that I just linked in the chat. We'll provide draft material later in 2020 and early in 2021 to get your feedback on. So thank you all so much for joining on your Thursday evening. We really appreciate all of this great feedback. We've got lots of great input in the chat as well, and have recorded this. So thank you for your time, and we look forward to hearing more from you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye all.